I'm very excited to have Camryn Garrett here today to discuss her book, Full Disclosure. So I'm going to mute myself and enjoy and learn along with you all.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to introduce Camryn Garrett. She is only 20 years old, and she's already published her first YA novel with Random House. She's a student at NYU, and she grew up in New York and began her writing career at 13 when she was selected as a Time for Kids reporter. Since then, her writing has appeared on MTV and in the Huffington Post and Rookie magazine. And she was recently selected as one of Teen Vogue's 21 under 21 girls who are changing the world. She is a proud advocate for diverse stories and storytellers in any medium. Full Disclosure is her first novel. Kathleen Glasgow in the New York Times wrote a big-hearted love letter to inclusivity, bravery, and acceptance. Full Disclosure is a wonder of a book, and 47 of you are lucky enough to get a class set of Camryn's book. And now, Camryn, it's your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Camryn Garrett, and like Patricia said, I'm the author of Full Disclosure, which is a young adult novel about a girl named Simone who has HIV. And there's this whole plot about her being blackmailed and trying to date a boy, and it explores themes like sexual identity and community. I want to talk a little bit about why I wrote it and my journey of discovery on researching, and then how you might be able to teach it in the classroom. So like Patricia said, I'm 20 and I first started writing this book when I was 16. I went to school in Long Island, so we took health class my sophomore year and I was 15, and we talked a lot about sexually transmitted diseases, but it wasn't a complete history or a complete story, really. I didn't know that there had been so many advances made for HIV and AIDS medically, and I didn't know that there were still so many people living with it. We were basically told you get HIV, and then HIV becomes AIDS, and then you die. And I remember being really confused because I knew Magic Johnson had HIV, but he was still alive. And we never really talked about how that might be. I really didn't become interested in learning more about HIV until I started reading adoption blogs, which I know sounds really odd, but I was interested in Angelina Jolie, and she adopted multiple children, but one of her children she adopted from Ethiopia. And when they first brought her home, they thought she had HIV. And I remember Angelina Jolie said, well, I don't really care. She's still my daughter. I love her no matter what. At the time, I was like 15, and I thought, that doesn't make any sense to me. She's going to die. Why would you adopt her? And when I went researching, I found a lot of blogs written by adoptive parents who had adopted kids with HIV. And they would talk about how they weren't really worried about their children's health. They really talked about HIV being something like diabetes or asthma that was very workable and very easy to live with. And they would say, well, the only thing that my child's really going to have to worry about is disclosing their status to someone when they have sex. And since a lot of these blogs are very Christian, they would say, my child's not going to have sex until they're married anyway, so it's not a problem, which then became what made me interested in writing this book. Was, what if there's a girl who has HIV and she's interested in having sex in high school, and she has to deal with the stigma that comes attached to it? And one of the reasons why writing this book was really important to me was not just because I knew that I was very ignorant about HIV. I knew my friends were, and I knew a lot of people my own age were. And when I try to think about stories about HIV or AIDS, a lot of times I can't really think of positive stories. And the history behind HIV and AIDS isn't necessarily positive, but most of the stories I knew were either Tyler Perry movies where HIV is sort of conferred upon someone as a punishment for committing bad deeds during the film, or in like really depressing older films like Philadelphia. It's older to me, but like I'm 20, so Philadelphia, Larry Kramer's works, which are very important, but again, don't address the fact that we've made so many steps forward medically. So that's a little bit about why I wrote the book. And while I was writing the first draft, I did a lot of research to learn more about HIV and AIDS, specifically the AIDS crisis, because even though it happened relatively not that long ago, again, I wasn't around for it, and most people my age don't know anything about it. A little story, my roommate last year came up to me. I was wearing an ACT UP Silence Equals Death shirt. And she said, that's really, really cool. Like, where'd you get it? And I told her I got it from ACT UP. And she said, cool, what is that? And I said it was an organization, or it's still an organization here in the city that helps fight for people with HIV and AIDS. And it's been around since the 80s. And she said, I really don't know what that is. And I was really shocked, but at that point I had done so much research that it felt like common knowledge to me. And I realized that the average 20, 19-year-old didn't really know. And so that goes into the research where I loved history in high school. I took like AP US history, AP European history, like all the AP histories offered at my school, but we never talked about the AIDS crisis, which I still can't really wrap my mind around now. The AIDS crisis, again, is what a lot of people think of when they think of HIV and AIDS, but even though gay and bisexual men make up 55% of those living with HIV in the United States, the majority of the people living with the virus are Black, according to AVERT, an organization at the forefront of HIV and sexual health education. And when researching about HIV and AIDS and the movement to fight for rights with people with these diseases, a lot of times we think of white gay activists like Larry Kramer, who are very important, but we don't think of the fact that people of color, especially Black people, have been at the forefront of this movement. So, for example, in 1986, the National Coalition of Black Lesbians and Gays sponsored the National Conference on AIDS and the Black Community in Washington, D.C. And more than 400 activists, healthcare providers, and educators met to discuss the specific needs for Black queer people affected by the disease. And so for context, 1986 was also the first year that the American Public Health Association had a session on AIDS, but no people of color were invited to participate. So an activist named Craig Harris, who was a Black gay man who had AIDS, basically stormed the meeting, took the microphone from the San Francisco Health Commissioner and declared that he would be heard. So Black people, especially Black gay people, have been at the forefront of this movement, even though we tend to forget them. There's also what I found really interesting while researching. The National Minority AIDS Council was founded in 1987, and they specifically created ways to reach people of color who weren't necessarily included by some of the white organizations that were around at the time. So for example, there was a Live Long Sugar campaign in 1989 starring Patti LaBelle, who as their spokesperson, which I think is amazing. And they also created HIV and AIDS prevention pamphlets that targeted Black men who are on the down low, who didn't consider themselves gay, but were still having sex with men. They also created magazines, poems, stories, all sorts of things. And I think knowing this history, not only the history of HIV and AIDS activism in general, but the specific role that people of color have played in it since the beginning is really important, not just for me as a Black gay woman, but for all of us, really. I also wanted to talk about the medical advances that have been made. If not everyone's aware, U equals U means that if the amount of HIV in your blood is undetectable, the virus is untransmittable, which means that if the amount of the virus in your blood is low enough to be undetectable, you can hypothetically have sex without protection and not spread the virus, which is a big, big deal. There's also medications like PrEP and PEP that people can take to protect themselves while having sex with people who have HIV. It's not all about sex, but that was mainly what the book was about. And moving on to teaching it in the classroom, since Larry Kramer recently passed, I wanted to talk a lot about the normal heart, which really, really inspired me while I was writing the book. Like I said, a lot of the inspiration for the book were these works that were depressing and kind of sad, but really important because they were written in the midst of the AIDS crisis in the United States. And The Normal Heart, I think, is so amazing. But I thought that The Normal Heart and Full Disclosure could be taught together, or Full Disclosure could be taught with a unit about Larry Kramer and his activism and the role that he played in HIV and AIDS activism. I also thought that the film How to Survive a Plague, which is a documentary, it's about people who are on the forefront of the HIV AIDS crisis in the 90s. And there's thousands of hours of, the movie isn't thousands of hours, but there's thousands of hours of footage from people who are actually there. And most of the people in the film, sadly, are no longer with us, but it's almost a primary source that could be considered that. I also thought about Angel in America by Tony Kushner. Not that I'm saying that my book is on that level, but I thought it was more of a classic text that could be taught alongside Full Disclosure, which is more contemporary and young adult. And that is what I have. Yeah. Thank you. My mom said to say thank you.
So at this time, I think what we'll do is we're going to, in a minute, move into breakouts, but are there any questions that folks have for Camryn before we go into the breakout?
Yes, there's a question from somebody. What were the names of the movies again, Camryn?
Sorry, I'm muted. The movies that I watched were called How to Survive a Plague, The Normal Heart. The Normal Heart is on HBO. It's directed by Ryan Murphy.
Yeah.
The How to Survive a Plague was directed by David France, and that's a documentary. And that's the one that has all of the first-person footage that actually came from the 90s.
One question, just going to paraphrase it a little bit, that came up, Camryn, was what do you think are kind of some of the societal or structural forces that have contributed to the Black community disproportionately bearing the weight of HIV infection?
That's a big question. I definitely think some of the same structural aspects are the same reason that the Black community is also being hit disproportionately right now by COVID. I think number one, there's like this distrust, this general distrust because of experiments that have been done on the Black community, like the Tuskegee experiments. My mom's over here like, but anyway, that definitely. And I also think a lot of Black people don't have adequate access to care. And the fact that, not to get very political, but the fact that insurance is still tied to people's jobs is also a big deal. And it really determines the type of care you get, how much it costs. And your insurance can basically say, like, I don't want to cover this, or I don't think this is important to cover, you pay for it. And I think that plays a big role.
What is your major at NYU? Somebody wants to know, Camryn.
I major in film at NYU.
Wonderful. And what year are you at NYU?
I just finished my sophomore year, so I'll be a junior in the fall.
Wonderful.
So,
there's another question. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No.
Okay, there's another question. What is your, do you think that there will be discrimination against people who now have had the coronavirus?
I don't think so, because I think I've been talking about this with people, and I think that because HIV initially hit communities that people already didn't like, that's sort of influenced the stigma, if that makes sense. So because we first saw HIV in gay communities and queer communities, and then what's another community it hit largely is the Black community. And these groups have been historically, I'm trying to think of a nice word, but historically just treated very badly by not only the state and the government, but on an individual level. And I think with COVID, when we first started seeing it, in this country, like it was with people like Tom Hanks and celebrities who we think are great. Everyone thinks Tom Hanks is great. And when he got it, everyone was like, oh no, like I'm so sad. And I think that definitely influences the treatment, that anyone could get COVID. I mean, anyone could get HIV, but that thinking is anyone could get COVID. And with HIV, it was a little different. Sorry, that was a little rambly.
No, that's fine. What is your next what is your next book project, and what kind of research? You mentioned the research that you did for Full Disclosure, which sounded wonderful. What is the research that you're now immersed in for your next book project?
My next book project is about a teen journalist who uncovers a sexual assault scandal. So I've been reading a lot of articles about Me Too and different court cases and just scandals that have occurred around famous people who have hurt people. I've also been reading and watching documentaries like On the Record, which was just released and is about Russell Simmons and his alleged assaults against Black women in the industry.
Great. So we are going to transition into our breakouts. If you've been with us before, this should look familiar. So as always in your breakout, introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Chris, and my pronouns are he, him, his. I taught history and research and English. And then our 3 questions are, how are you already involving LGBTQ plus stories in your classroom? How might you use Full Disclosure in your classroom? And what questions do you have for Camryn? And while you guys are in breakout, we will look over the questions that you guys put in the chat thus far and start to get those ready for our Q&A session. We'll be in breakout for about 10 minutes. And again, the resource, the slideshow that I have here is shared in that folder that I linked before. And I'll put that link back in the chat right now. All right, Patricia and Joe, do you think we should get started with the Q&A?
Okay, so we had a couple of people, Camryn, who joined a little late. Could you just very briefly talk about the inspiration behind your book, Full Disclosure?
Yeah, basically the inspiration behind the book were 2 big things. And one was that I was really, really interested in reading adoption blogs written by parents who had adopted kids with HIV and who talked about what it was like on a day-to-day basis. And the other half was the fact that I realized both I and my peers really didn't know much about HIV, and I wanted to research it and spread the information in an accessible way.
And there's a message, there's a question from or a comment and a question from a health teacher here. First, she's sorry that you got medically outdated information and inaccurate information in your health class.
Thank you.
But her question is, how do you think young people could see HIV as relevant today?
I definitely think the comparisons between HIV and the coronavirus can be really helpful to make it seem more relevant. But I also think seeing activists who are their age or a little older is really important. There's an HIV activist named Ashley Murphy who is either my age or a little younger, and she's given a TED Talk about what it's like to grow up with HIV. I think I can put it in the chat. But I think seeing people your age talk about it makes it seem real, as opposed to older people talking about it and making it seem like it doesn't really apply to you. This is Ashley Murphy's TED Talk.
And another health teacher has written, I am looking forward to using your book as part of my health class. Are there specific things you think are very important for teachers to include in teaching their students about HIV and sex ed?
I think what's really important is combating the stigma. And I think there's a lot of outdated information that young people might have access to on the internet. Just a few months ago, there was like a viral Twitter post about someone being exposed to HIV at a nail salon. which isn't actually possible. You're not going to be exposed to HIV if someone's doing your nails, or you're using the same water as someone who has HIV. So I think the basics are really important so that you can combat ignorance like that, but then also talking about how stigma impacts the lives of people with HIV, because the fact is a lot of them are not only badly treated verbally, but are attacked, can be faced with intimate partner violence because of it. Those things are a reality.
Have any younger people contacted you to let them know you're an inspiration? And do you travel to schools to talk to students about your work?
Yeah, it's a little weird when that happens, but it was really touching when a girl from my former high school contacted me and let me know that she was very touched by the book and the fact that I wrote it, and that meant a lot. I've traveled, I don't know if I've been to a school, but I've been to conferences where where teenagers are brought. So I've been to the Texas Teen Book Festival, which had like 16,000 teenagers, and talked to them and got to meet with them, which I think was really, really great.
What would you say is the age range for your book?
I definitely think it's a little older because there's a lot of cursing and sexual content. So I would say 14 and up.
And do you do school visits?
I do, yeah. Not right. I think I can do Zoom visits right now, but not real ones.
Oh, yeah. School's not in session.
Yeah, but in general, yeah.
And what are the most effective ways to discuss racial disparities in HIV infection rates?
I think to look at the facts and the statistics and not go in with ideas that we might have gleaned from pop culture or people who aren't as informed is probably the best way.
And have you ever seen Blue by Derek Jarman?
No, I haven't. Is it a movie? Blue by Derek Jarman. I haven't, but I will put it on my list. Oh, that's so sad. Oh, yeah. Sorry, it's a documentary. The filmmaker shows his struggle with AIDS, and then he passed away.
If you've done author visits with students, what kinds of questions have surprised you?
I think there's this idea that young people can't really understand complex issues, and it's not true. I think most people here know that's not true because you're teachers and educators and you see young people every day. But talking to people and young people asking, how can I stop stigma? What can I do to help people with HIV? How does this work? Just how into it they get is really encouraging.
Let me see. How do we make HIV and AIDS a reality for middle schoolers? This is from a middle school teacher.
There's this Washington Post article. Let me see if I can find it. And it's called Telling JJ. And it was published in 2015, but it's about a 10-year-old. And I think even if middle schoolers didn't read the whole article, just reading excerpts of the article would make it really accessible, just because it's a 10-year-old, someone who is a little younger than them. And she doesn't quite understand the fact that she has HIV. And so she's discovering what that means, why she has to take medication, what could happen if she doesn't take it. And I think that was a very accessible article for me when I was first researching, and I think could be appropriate for middle schoolers.
Have you always been so work-oriented, even as a young child? Who were the adults in your life that supported you in order to get you where you are now in terms of all the work you've done?
I don't know if I was work oriented. Mom, was I work oriented? My mother says that I was. I don't really feel like I was, but my mom and my dad definitely supported me. I was a Time for Kids reporter in 8th grade, and they used to haul me around the city to do projects and events. So they've always been great.
Let's see. Looking back on your earlier school experiences, how do you think teachers and librarians could have been more helpful to you?
I think my health teacher tried his best, but he also, at the end of the semester, he asked us all to write down things he could do better on a card. And I wrote that I wished I had more access to ways to protect myself from STDs. And he said he wasn't allowed to. He could only talk about abstinence. So I think that was one thing that held him back. In terms of librarians, I actually thought the librarians in my school did a really good job at introducing us to different stories from different people. They were very involved and talked to everyone and knew everyone. And I think knowing students like that really helped. I'll paste the article in the chat.
And you still working on that, Camryn?
Yeah, I just sent it.
Oh, okay. How do librarians make sure that they don't self-censor and choose not to include LGBTQ books because of a fear of pushback from administrators, parents?
I think talking to students and asking what they would like to see is a really great way to find out what you can use. I just remember my librarian was always at her desk and we could always talk to her. And I could say, I'm looking for more books like this or more books like that. And she would be honest and say, I don't know if I can get books with sex in them, for example. But we really were able to be open with her. And I think that could be a way to help.
And someone wants to know if you could talk about your writing process.
I usually outline very vaguely in Google Drive, and then I try to finish a first draft in a month or two, because if I take longer, I start to realize how many flaws the draft has and I give up. And then I revise for like a year by myself, and then either with an editor or an agent.
How long did it take you to write Full Disclosure then?
2 years.
Let's see. Someone wants to know if you're willing to do virtual author visits during this time.
Definitely.
Okay. Someone also wants to know if there's an audiobook version.
There is, yes. Let me find a link.
Meanwhile, while you're doing that, one librarian just wants you to know that Full Disclosure flew off the shelf in her library.
Oh, that's so awesome. That makes me very happy.
And someone wants to know, who are your writing inspirations?
I really love, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Renee Watson. She writes middle grade chapter books and young adult. She won, or she was maybe nominated for the National Book Award for Piecing Me Together. She's recently wrote How to Make Sunshine, which is a middle grade book. She's amazing, and she educates other Black writers and sticks out her neck for us. She's great. Also Toni Morrison, but we don't write the same things. So
Do you have any suggestions for students who are interested in writing?
there used to be, let me see if I can find it. There used to be a website called Teens Can Write Too, and it was run and maintained by other teenagers. So it hasn't been updated in a while, but I will post it in chat anyway. And they had resources about writing and about querying an agent and publishing, but if that wasn't what you were interested in, there were other just general writing posts and tips. And I used to love following that blog when I was a little younger.
Are you aware whether your book has ever been challenged because of its LGBTQ content and its sexual content? And if you are aware, if it's been challenged, how have you responded?
As far as I know, it hasn't been challenged. If it were to be challenged, I would be sad because I do think it's important for young people to have access to books that might not be necessarily appropriate, but it hasn't happened so far, which makes me feel good.
Okay. Have you seen the Golden Girls episode 72 Hours about when Rose thought she had contracted HIV through a blood transfusion? If you have, how do you think the episode affected the view of AIDS in the 1980s?
I haven't seen that. I'm sorry. I know, I feel bad. I think my big reference to HIV before I started researching it was the film Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington.
Someone wants to know, I guess, how do they schedule a Zoom or an in-person visit with you? Do they go through you or your agent, or how do they contact you? What's your contact information in order to do that?
Yeah, I have it on my website, so I'm going to link, because I have my agent, my publicist, and then my email here.
Okay. Someone wants to know, have you read Positive by Paige Rawls?
I have not. Is it a young adult?
I don't know, but
Oh, it's a memoir.
oh, okay.
Interesting.
Camryn, can you speak to the project that a
Yes.
student sent you?
Is Chris there? Can I share the screen? Oh, cool. So on Twitter, a student, I think she's in high school, sent this project to me. Can everyone see it? Okay. So it's a passion project, and she took my book and statistics and truths about HIV and put them all together in this website. So there's a page for the book where she sort of gives a summary, and then the truth about HIV and AIDS, where she gives definitions. I love that she has the U=U rule. The difference between HIV and AIDS, how HIV is treated, what is HIV, frequently asked questions, how it's transmitted, can you get it from kissing, can two HIV positive parents have an HIV negative child? Yes, they can. So I think this is really great because I think especially how is it transmitted is a big question. Close to home, I don't want to go on that because I don't want to reveal too much about the person who made this, but there are statistics about how HIV impacts the population in their specific state. There is a part about the stigma. What is HIV stigma? What is HIV discrimination? Why is there a stigma around HIV and AIDS? And how stigma affects the HIV response. An unwillingness to take an HIV test means more people are diagnosed late when the virus may have already progressed to AIDS. This makes treatment less effective, increasing the likelihood of transmitting HIV to others and causing early death. And ending the stigma and discrimination. What you can do to end the stigma and discrimination. So protect, educate, and show support. And that's pretty much it. I know I flew through that, but I will paste the link in the chat. I think it's a really great project and a great way to connect the book with the way it impacts people in the student's specific life.
What was the student's inspiration for creating that website besides the fact that she or he read your book? Was it a school
It was a school
assignment?
project assignment to write or to create a website about a current day problem reflected in a book that they had read.
Wonderful. That's very impressive.
Yeah, I really like it.
How did that person end up contacting you to share it? Through your website? They found your information?
They contacted me on Twitter. I think they sent me a private message and they said, I did a project on your book, and I looked at it and I thought it was really amazing. And I asked them if they would mind if I shared it, and they said they were flattered. So.
Wow. There's a comment from a health teacher. Abstinence-only education is a public health problem. As you said, it doesn't prepare students for their lives now or in the future. New York City has comprehensive sex education in public schools with support available for teachers. So this person just wanted you to know that.
That's awesome.
Someone wants to know how you balance writing and schoolwork.
My mom's asleep, so I can say that I don't really do it that well. I was on the dean's list last semester, but it's really whatever takes precedence in the moment. So if I have a deadline, I'm going to spend more time revising than working on school. And if I have midterms, I'm going to spend more time studying than writing.
So right now you are, well, you're done, you just finished sophomore year, so you have the summer ahead of you. Are you planning on spending the whole summer writing?
Yes, I'm writing another book. I'm excited.
Wonderful. Fiction?
Yes.
YA?
Yes.
Wonderful. Is that what you wanted to be? Did you want to be a YA writer, or is the field wide open for you? You'll write anything?
It's interesting because I always said I wanted to write just YA, but I've been reading more and more adult novels. So I think as I get older, I'll have more to say and maybe want to branch out.
Wonderful. Let's see. Someone wants to know what high school you attended.
I went to Bayshore High School in Suffolk County on Long Island. Harvey Milk also went there.
Really?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, not weird, but we didn't know until like senior year.
Wow. Okay, Camryn, that's about it for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.